like others in the community of small island developing states, are among the most vulnerable to the effects of global climate change. While contributing the least to the causes, small island states and low-lying countries have been the first to experience the impacts and will suffer the greatest consequences of this existential threat.
Singular characteristics that the Caribbean has as opposed to Central America in particular. One of them has to be with the vulnerability to climate change, as we have witnessed with Irma, Jose, and Maria recently. Two, their dependence of water. It's very different from Central America or South America. In the Caribbean, there's a high dependence on underground water, and the use of energy is very particular too. The energy matrix in terms of the food, water, energy, it's also very particular.
What is often taken for granted and water security may be the least discussed, but one of the most important topics when addressing the impacts of climate change on small island states. So let's talk about water and some of the areas where we must adapt and make real changes to ensure long-term water security. A good place to start is to look at the nexus between water and agriculture.
I think the situation we face with now is that because of years of abuse, if you want, for want of a better word, where we did clear lands of vegetation and altered the nature of the soil in terms of its ability to absorb water through infiltration, and that water reappears in the river as base flow, that has changed. So now rivers run dry very early, and the base flow is really, really small. In the years gone by, let's say 20, 30 years ago, base flow was fairly strong, and you would go deep into the dry season, the rivers would flow. Now, because you do not have enough intake of water because of rainfall shortages, but also you have more runoff now than you have percolation. So you find that there are quick flash floods, that the water comes, get into the river quickly, river rises, then drops again, and that's it. And once you get into a dry condition, there is not enough storage in the profile to feed the plants. So hence we are more susceptible to drought now than we were before. So the question of how do we put in vegetation back on the land to improve the ability of the soil to absorb water, to infiltrate, that I think is key going into this situation of climate change.
The absence of effective land use policies also seriously impacts our water resources.
So we have an inadequacy as far as monitoring is concerned, and at the same time you have a lot of changes in that environment, and so, but we don't have the consciousness as far as the politicians or even the technocrats. We're not very sensitive to those issues. So I think we keep losing ground. I'm not seeing much advancement as far as our being able to assess what our resources are. And in the absence of our assessing it, we can actually see that there's a degradation of the resources.
I think our land use policies with respect to water security are probably the one area that is climate change agnostic. We need to do this regardless whether there is an impact of climate change or not. It's the one area where I think we've shot ourselves in the foot. It's the one area where by taking more resolute, more visionary action, we could have done a better job in securing our water resources. So This is something that has to be done regardless whether we're experiencing the impacts of climate change or not. We need to have proper land use policies, and these land use policies need to pay attention to integrated water resources management and understand that the management of that water resource, the sustainable management of that water resource, is crucial for every single economic sector that we're seeking to develop.
When we speak about land use and ecosystem integrity, we must focus our attention on the tourism sector.
One of our focuses at the SLHGA through the Tourism Enhancement Fund has been on enhancing water security in the communities, not just for the hotels, but in the communities that supply our employees as well. Because one of the things that causes a bit of friction between tourism and the rest of society is when the water supply returns, who gets the water supply first. We believe that we should be focused on beyond just our members, but also the broader community that supplies the staff who service our guests as well. And if you have a situation where your employees are coming to work coming from a home where they don't have consistent water supply, it affects their well-being, it affects their mental state of mind, it affects hygiene, it could create health issues as well.
I'd like to stress that it's our fortune that we operate on such an extensive landmass that contains some of the resources that we needed to move forward in a fairly unique direction within St. Lucia. A lot of the other hotels don't have that opportunity due to how they're located or how their land is formed. So it's not necessarily a model that can be shared by all, but there are, let's say, aspects that could be considered by everybody. So what we need to really do is be much more proactive about how we utilize our existing buildings, how we capture water from gutters and storm drains, which typically at this time goes directly to the sea, and have a way to reuse that either for irrigation or for flushing of toilets, etc. So we need to evolve, as does the world, in order to meet the challenges that are coming.
There are consequences when best practices are not followed, and the treatment of wastewater is a case in point.
Water is also a medium for transport for waste from our homes, businesses and industries. That's why there is so much wastewater. Most of it discharged untreated into our coastal areas. Because water is such a good transport medium, it could also spread disease-causing organisms, and therefore it is so necessary to ensure that our drinking water is safe.
Unfortunately, insufficient water availability and poor water quality inevitably lead to serious public health problems.
Floods and droughts not only reduce recharge to drinking water resources, but also increase the risk of contamination and pollution. Waterborne diseases such as diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, salmonellosis, typhoid fever are all preventable, but remain diseases of concern. Flood also promote vector breeding, like the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and resulting diseases like dengue, Zika, chikungunya, yellow fever, and bring other vectors closer to home like rats, increasing the risk of leptospirosis.
In looking at the state of our water sector, we must also examine the utility companies that are charged with the responsibility to manage this valuable resource and distribute potable water to every consumer on our islands. Are they in good condition? Do they have the required resources to discharge their responsibilities effectively?
I don't think the utilities have done a good job of convincing the powers that be of the importance of the water supply. I mean, without water, you have no industry. You have no tourism industry. A lot of your factories wouldn't be able to operate. Really, you lose your ability to generate, or to have a proper functioning economy. So we really do underestimate the need to ensure that we have a sustainable and resilient water supply. Once politicians can accept that fact, then they should also accept that they need to invest more in the infrastructure and in the human resources as well, to make sure that we have persons who can properly manage the resource.
Regrettably, the challenges facing the water sector will be amplified by the impacts of climate change.
With the challenges that we have, and with the overlay of climate change upon that, we actually have to be proactive and don't wait for, for climate change impacts to reach a peak before we act, because already they're serious. So as a matter of course and as a matter of urgency, we have to begin to invest in more resilient water supply, build our dams, our reservoirs, be resilient to the extreme events. We have to make sure that our water supply systems, pipelines and so on are equally resilient. In addition to that, we have to begin to plan making sure that our storage is properly distributed. In other words, that there is storage at locations that will be able to provide all the communities that will need it. We have to ensure that we capture enough water and that we don't waste it.
Where the water sector is concerned, the challenge for the Caribbean is twofold. First, it needs an action plan to deal urgently with issues of water resource management, governance, and utility viability.
We have a challenge in relation to the adequacy of the infrastructure, where the infrastructure has not kept pace with the pace of development in terms of population growth, the growth in industry, the growth of the tourism sector. We have a scenario where the infrastructure is aging and has not been replaced fast enough. We have scenarios where the cost of provision of water is not being adequately met by the low tariffs that are being charged to the Caribbean public.
And second, the region must implement measures to increase the resilience of the sector to the impacts of climate change.
These challenges, however, have been exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. And that is, in our mind at the bank, the biggest threat to the sector. The estimate rises into the billions in terms of the works that are needed. We are talking about infrastructure that is vulnerable. We are talking about water sources that are vulnerable. The issue is not the availability of the money, however. At the bank, we between ourselves and other development agencies, the money is there. The challenge is to come up with what we call bankable projects that are well designed, that take into account all of the engineering issues, the environmental issues, the social issues. Getting projects to that level, that is a challenge, and such that whatever money is spent well, and there would be great benefit to all of those involved.
Now more than ever, we must stop taking water for granted. Integrated water resource management must be mainstreamed into all elements of our policy and decision making. Every citizen and every visitor to our region must be sensitized to the role that they must play in sustainably managing our water resources. There is no more time or water to waste.